evening, everyone. It is your girl, Marcie Thomas, and I am really excited to be here with you again for another episode of Live Well, Sister. So please come on in the room and get ready for a very important conversation that affects all of our lives, whether or not we realize it as we get into it, because most people, I would say, want to be people who make a difference in the world. And tonight's conversation is going to be about just that. So I am coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, by way of Cleveland, Ohio, and a bunch of other places in between. So it is indeed a pleasure to have an opportunity to come into your homes or on your phones and be able to really talk about important issues that matter to all of us as we strive to live well. So tonight's special guest, first of all, I'm going to show you this beautiful book. It's beautiful. Look at the colors, so beautifully done. The name of the book we'll be discussing is Micro Activism, How You Can Make a Difference in the World Without a Bullhorn. Small actions equal big results, by our special guest, Omkari L. Williams. Now, she has worked as a political consultant and life coach for 30 years, emphasizing supporting activists who identify as introverted or highly sensitive. As a queer Black woman, she shares her own story of challenging injustice to empower others to make a difference in their communities. She leads workshops and trainings and hosts a popular podcast, Stepping Into Truth, where she interviews people doing activism in their own unique ways. To help people identify their own way of activism, she created the Activist Archetype quiz, which we're going to get into, and we'll share what my archetypes are here shortly. She was born and raised in Manhattan and currently lives in Western Massachusetts. So without any further delay, let's welcome Omkari to Live Well, Sister. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's such a pleasure to have you here. You know, we talked a little bit before we came online, but, you know, we have a place in common, Savannah, Georgia, so we'll talk about that a little bit. So both of us have kind of been a bunch of different places and had an opportunity to serve and support others along the way. So congratulations on the success of Micro Activism. How does that feel?
I have to say, when I wrote the book, I was just writing what I knew and hoping that it would land for people, and that people are responding to it so well is just such a blessing. And I am really grateful because everyone has a contribution to make, and this is mine. So it's nice that it's being received with so much love and so much respect and attention.
Absolutely. And you just recently won an award, you found out. I saw you posted it on social media.
Yeah, I found out yesterday that I won a Gold Nautilus Award, which, let me just say, okay, so someone else who won a Nautilus Award this year is Dolly Parton.
Okay.
So this is the only time in my life I'm going to be in a list that also includes Dolly Parton. And I'm pretty sure she's one of the best humans on the planet. So I feel quite honored to be in her company. So it was very exciting to hear that. Yeah, mine was for social change and social justice category. So I'm thrilled, really thrilled.
Yes, yeah. So of course, that is your space of expertise and you're being recognized for that. And that's a wonderful thing. But of course, I know that you don't necessarily do it for the recognition. You do it for the love that's in your heart. So being recognized for your work is indeed a bonus. So
it is a bonus. It's just, I think it's part of why I was so surprised. It just sort of never occurred to me, but it's lovely, mostly because it means that more people will likely see this work, and hopefully that will inspire them to go out in the world and make the change that they can make. And that's my goal, is everyone has something to offer. And I want people to understand that it doesn't have to be this huge, big thing. We don't all have to change the whole world. We can just look at our little tiny corner and do what we can there.
Yes, that is so important. As a matter of fact, my tagline on Facebook is something to the effect that I'm just doing my part to make, things as good as I can in my little corner of the world, kind of like what
exactly. That is exactly it.
So before we get into the book itself, what was it that actually led you to wanting to get into activism and those sort of things? How did you land where you currently are?
Well, I mean, honestly, partly it's sort of the family business in a way. My dad was a humanitarian and a diplomat, and he worked all over the world. And I just grew up understanding that with all the obstacles that exist, being a Black kid in the United States, I still was really lucky. There
Mm-hmm.
were people who had it so much harder than I was ever going to have it. And that you have to do what you can. I mean, I just grew up with that idea, that awareness that you have a responsibility to try and leave the world a little tiny bit better than you found it.
Mm-hmm.
And what that looks like for each of us is going to be different. I mean, the kind of work my dad did took him to places like Rwanda during the genocide. And I personally, I am not constitutionally set up for that.
Right.
So I had to find my own way, and this is my way.
Yes, and your way is powerful because, as you mentioned, we all do things at different levels, and doing that is it for you. It wouldn't be for me either. You know, I was actually in the service, as I think I told you earlier, and even that, I never went to a war zone, so I can't imagine what that would actually be like. You know, to
And
do.
I don't want to know, I
Right.
don't want to know up close and personal. But I am grateful that there are people who do that work
Mm-hmm.
because unfortunately it still needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that my work is to move in a different direction and try and bring the world to a place where that kind of work doesn't need to be done anymore.
Right, right. So by micro activism, because the name of the book is Micro Activism, How You Can Make a Difference in the World Without a Bullhorn. I know what you mean by micro activism, but for those who haven't had a chance to read the book yet, what do you mean by that term?
What I mean by it is tiny little acts of activism, because I think when most people hear the word activism, they have this image in their head of someone like Dr. King or Greta Thunberg or Gloria Steinem or John, the late John Lewis, who I just adore so much because of the kind of activism he embodied. But everyone's not meant to be the face of a movement.
Right.
If, something I'm fond of saying is, if Dr. King hadn't had the 250,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial for the March on Washington, he'd have just been a tourist, right? It
Mm-hmm.
was those 250,000 people whose names we don't know, whose faces we don't know, who came there and made that event what it was by the sheer volume of their numbers and the sheer power of their commitment. So yeah, you need the Dr. King up there giving the speech, but you also need all those people down there listening and then going home and doing something to move the needle towards justice. The person giving the speech can't do it without everybody else involved. And
Right.
so the micro activism part are the pieces that are not necessarily the face of a movement. It's the pieces that sustain a movement and create change and bring a better world into being. That's
Mm-hmm.
micro activism, tiny, tiny, tiny little bits all put together that make the shift that we need.
Yes, yes. And as you're saying, I'm just thinking about that. You know, you do talk about the Montgomery bus boycott, for example, and I've had a chance to go there, and a lot of us know about Rosa Parks, but there were two young women, actually, it was more than two total, but several young women even before her, but she was kind of chosen to be a face of the movement, so to speak.
Yes,
There were all those people who didn't ride the bus for 13 months.
that's right. I
That
mean, and
helped.
in Montgomery, in the
Right,
heat, in the pouring down rain,
right,
and miles, they walked miles or they carpooled or they figured out some way. And all of those people made it happen. If all of those people hadn't said, I'm going to commit to this for however long it takes, and 13 months is a long time to be walking back and forth to work,
mm-hmm.
it wouldn't have changed, right? But they did it. They made it change.
Right. And that's what we're saying when we talk about micro activism, but it doesn't even have to be that. There are so many different ways that it shows up. So
So many.
one of the first things that you say that an activist, if you look in the mirror, you're looking at an activist. So,
Yes, you are.
how important is it for people to understand that they are or have the ability or capacity to be activists within themselves?
I think it's really hard for us to live into things if we don't think it's possible for us, right? You know, you hear people saying how important it is to see representations of ourselves in different realms, like why it's important to see Black doctors and Black scientists and, you know, just Black people in positions of authority and responsibility and power, because it is an education for the rest of us that this is possible. And if you don't see that, it's really hard to imagine that you actually can become this thing. But if you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, you know what? I went out and I made that little bit of change. That little bit of change matters. I am actually am an activist. An activist looks like me. And I don't have to go comparing myself to my next door neighbor or anybody else on the planet. I can do the thing I'm called to do and make my contribution, and I can own it. And just the owning of it inspires other people to action. It inspires other people to see themselves as change makers, as activists. And I think it's really important that we do that.
Yes, it is. It is. Because even in reading the book and kind of sitting with it, thinking of myself, because for most of my life, my mom is watching. I know she's watching, and she knows, well, definitely most of my adult life, I have been a person who loves to volunteer, do community service. And then I realized, oh, I'm really an activist. By being out there and doing these different forms of community service. That makes me an activist, so to speak. I just never really assigned that title to myself.
But I think it's important to hold that title, right? Because that helps on those days when you just feel like everything is terrible, nothing I do makes any difference, because it connects you to all the other activists, and that energy infuses you, and it infuses the people you're working with, and it infuses the people you're serving. And that activist energy is the energy of community. It's the energy of making positive change. And we need that. I mean, the world is brutal right now. It is a hot mess. And if we can't connect to that sense of change and positivity, we're all going to just be sitting home watching Netflix and eating chips. Right. And that's going to get us nowhere. So we have to stay in that energy of possibility, in that energy of small, steady progress, because that's what we can sustain. Otherwise, it just becomes overwhelming for most of us.
Absolutely. And as we continue, you all, everyone who's watching, please feel free, if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to drop them in the comment section, because we love to hear what you all have to say. Now, based on the things that are happening in the world, we are going to get into that in a little bit, but I really want to dive into some of the things that Omkari talks about in the book. So just be a little patient. We're going to get into it and provide some thought behind what's happening now. So, of course, one of the things, as you mentioned, there are so many different things that we could really tackle in the world, whether it's, people being unhoused or people eating. One of my favorite things to support is literacy and literacy initiatives, or, women's health. There's so many, there are 11 different things that we could potentially get involved in. But it suggests that people begin to lay a foundation so it doesn't become overwhelming to them as to, oh my goodness, if I watched any news show, and in one show, it might be, 5 different things that I could get involved in.
At least.
Right, at least 5. So how do we begin to go through a process of kind of laying our own foundation, and how does that tie into who we are as individuals?
I think that it's really important to limit your activist activities to 1 or 2 areas of focus. Just because, as you say, Marcie, there are so many things that can pull your attention. And then the next thing you know, you're just sort of ping-ponging all over, and you're not really gaining any traction. And you're not building out the relationships that will actually sustain you and help you make more progress. So I think it's really important. Pick 1 or most 2 things to focus on at a time. And having said that, let me say, it doesn't mean that you are married to these things. Right. If something else happens that is really important, you can shift your focus. It's just, I suggest you let one thing go so that you're never working on more than two things at a time. And then you can come back to it when things shift, right? So I think that the other piece of that is important is the things that you are working on should in some way connect to you really personally.
Mhm.
And I call that your origin story. So, what's the reasoning behind the thing that you're really committed to? I have a friend in Savannah who is very committed to reproductive rights.
Mhm.
Her grandmother, great grandmother, I think it was, actually tried to perform an abortion on herself, back 100 years ago or whatever it was, and died, on the floor in her bathroom because she had all these kids already and she just could not face the prospect of having another kid and the reality of that. And so this is a really important thing for my friend. She's very committed to that particular cause. You're committed to literacy. I'm going to assume that there's a story behind there somewhere, because that's how we humans function. We have something happens and there's a story that gets attached to it for us, and we just keep working with that story and we keep moving along. And those stories really are powerful. And those stories help us stay connected to our cause, and they help us keep going when things get hard. So I am really committed to people finding that story, finding their origin story, and then building their activism off of that, because then you're not just sort of hopping on the latest thing that's on the bandwagon. You're actually connecting to something that has personal, powerful meaning for you. And it's much easier to keep going when that's the case.
That's very true. But real quick, for me, the thing with literacy, I was always a kid who loved to read, would go to the library and stuff like that, just on my own. But then as I got a little older, my father would make me read books and write reports, which I hated at the time. But over time, I grew to really enjoy, books and literature. And it was something that he and I shared together, like 6 years ago. So, I mean, even me doing this right here and right now is a part of that, because I might not be writing the books yet, but I'm able to bring on authors and people and can help them to get their words out. But then outside of that, in my sorority, we do book drives, which I help to with every year for children in schools. I go
Yes.
kids at school during the school year, donate books to little free libraries, all those things. So yeah, literacy is definitely a big thing for me. But the origin of it comes from childhood.
Yeah. And when you speak about it, there's so much energy and so much joy in you. And that's the piece that I think it's important to connect to, because that's the piece that keeps us doing the thing, right? It's I have a similar experience with books. I grew up with a household that had a ton of books. And that's what I remember sitting by the radiator in the winter, because I was the kid who was always cold, right? And I'd be sitting there with my books and my blanket, and I would just sit there and read all those miserable cold days. And it was such joy. And I look back on that and I feel like, oh gosh, I remember that so fondly. And those things matter. Those experiences matter. And we all have something like that, right? And that's what we should lean into in our work as much as possible, is lean into that connection, because it supports us.
Absolutely. It makes it not really feel like work, because
it's not work then.
It's coming from a pure heart space.
Completely.
Important. This is important. And in the book, when you get the book, well, sidebar, as you can see, it's a beautiful cover. But what I really love on the inside, besides all of my tabs, you can see that there are different illustrations and things like that, which are beautiful. So
Octavia Inc. did the illustrations. Octavia Inc.'s illustrations are so wonderful. Sometimes someone just captures what you want perfectly. And she did. And I'm so grateful for how it's all laid out. And it's just, yeah, that, and I can say that because I had nothing to do with that. I can't draw to save my life. So this was not on me, but it's just, I'm so thrilled with how it came out. It's really, the people who put it together are really talented.
Yes, it's beautifully done, and it's, it's small, it's compact. You could throw it in a purse, whatever the case may be. So I do love that about the look and feel of the book. But as you have each different section, you do also have questions and things that people can think about, exercises and stuff like that to really help you sort it out. And just real quickly, and then move on about figuring out what your one or two things are. I like that exercise that you give us. It's like write it all down and then like just kind of knock them off two at a time.
Yeah. So it's like, so if you have a list and you have this big list, and you can do this not just with this kind of thing, but with anything, when you have more things, then you can figure out what I like best. So let's say you have 10 things on a list. So you write them all down and then you compare the first two. And it's like, okay, well, I like one better than two. So you cross off two. Then you compare 1 and 3. Well, I like 3 better than 1. So you cross off 1, and you keep going until you get to where you are. And it's just a really great way when you're feeling overwhelmed by which thing do I do, to knock it down. So you're only ever comparing 2 things at once. Because if you're trying to compare 10 things at once, your brain is going to explode. Right. So don't do that. So.
Right. Analysis paralysis,
Completely. How to avoid that.
Right. So I really like that. And you're right. That would work for other things as well.
Works for everything.
Yes. So another thing that you talk about is learning what your actual type is, your activist archetype. You have an actual quiz, and there are 4 different archetypes. So, of course, you get the book, you can take the quiz, and I don't know if it's available other places as well.
It's online as well. It's on my website.
Yes, which is scrolling at the bottom. So you can go to omkariwilliams.com and find that. But what I liked about it is it's really simple, but it's a way to kind of figure out what type of activist you are. So yeah. What are the archetypes? And then I'll tell you all what mine are.
Okay, so there are 4, as you mentioned. There's the headliner, and the headliner is just what it sounds like, the person who's likely to be up on the stage giving the speech. Then there's the producer, and because I had come from an acting background, a lot of this is sort of like, oh, on a film, who would these people be? So you have on a film, the producer oversees everything, right? They're the person behind the scenes, making sure that every group has their assignment and all the jobs are meted out and everything gets done. Then you have the organizer, and the organizer is basically like the head of a department on a film set. So it might be the head of the lighting department or the head of catering, whatever. Their specific actions are around a very specific thing. They're not looking at the entire big picture. They're looking at one particular aspect of it. And, they love things like spreadsheets. Producers also like spreadsheets. And then the last category is the indispensable, which on a film set would be like the background actors. And you can't even imagine a film where there are no background actors, right? You'd be like, where are the people? This is so weird. But so the background actors are super important, even though you never know who they are. And the indispensables fulfill that same function. They're the people who are in the office, stuffing envelopes, printing up flyers, making phone calls, making sure that there's coffee in the break room and toilet paper in the bathroom, and that people know how to get to the beginning of the march site. They're doing all that behind the scenes stuff without which nothing would happen. So they are extremely important. And they are a large percentage of activists. And that's great because there's always so much work to do. And we need people who will do all of those different jobs. And I will say most people have a predominant type, but a lot of people are pretty close between 2 types because we all contain multitudes.
Right.
And in different circumstances, we're going to be different people in a way. We're going to fulfill different roles. So I think that when you find your archetype or your archetypes, you get to see how you are overall. And my experience is that people who take the quiz, of all the people who've ever taken it, and it's thousands at this point, I've only had maybe a handful ever say, I don't think it fit me. Most people are like, oh no, that's me.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say that you are?
I am a headliner for sure. Yeah, I'm pretty consistently a headliner. I have indispensable. That's my next thing, because I'm not a spreadsheet person at all. And I'm very happy to do the work behind the scenes, but this being forward facing comes very easily to me.
Right.
So I lean into that because it is easy for me. And for a lot of people, honestly, they'd rather sit home with a sharp object in their eye than talk to a room full of people. So, and for me, it's like, I don't mind. I'm fine with this.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking of the indispensables. They could be, on a phone bank. They could
Absolutely.
be writing letters, things like that, doing petitions online or whatever the case may be. Those types of things that you don't necessarily see. But as I told you before we came on, I think it was like seven points total across the questions, and I had 3 for the indispensable and 2 for the headliners. So they seem at cross purposes, because it's like, okay, I can be in the front, but I can really be in the back too.
Yeah, I mean, most people will not show up as headliner hardly at all.
Mm-hmm.
Hardly at all. But when you said to me that you led with that you had headliner, and I thought to myself, no, I'm sorry, you led with it, you had indispensable, and I thought to myself, and the other one's going to be headliner, because I could see it, right? And
right,
it's interesting, because often we'll look at a friend or a colleague and we'll say, oh no, now I understand exactly who you are.
mm-hmm.
And that's actually kind of helpful, because then you stop asking them to do things that are really outside of their comfort zone.
Right.
You don't want to go ask someone who is down the line and indispensable to stand up in front of the whole office and give a talk. You don't want to, I mean, that's torture for them. You don't want to do that. So finding out who people are lets you really give them a chance to shine in their own strengths and their own abilities. And so I think it's really fun in that way.
Yes, it's definitely when you are working in community, and that is a big thing. Practicing radical community is a part of this whole thing, because as much as we can do things as individual, it's all those little pieces coming together that chip away at whatever that issue is or that conflict is. So we need people who have different roles and can do these different parts.
We do. And also community, it's there to support us when things are hard. Mm-hmm. Those are the people we lean on in hard times, and who lean on us in their hard times. And they're also the people who sometimes will notice before we do that we're burning out.
Right.
They'll say, you know what? You've been pushing it really hard, and you probably don't even notice this, but you need to take a break. Mm-hmm. You need to take care of yourself and give yourself a little bit of time off here. Go spend the day out in nature, or, read a book, or whatever you need to do. But I can tell that you're coming up against your wall. Sometimes we don't notice that for ourselves. We just keep going. So community is also there, because when things are great, it's a lot more fun to celebrate with people than with your cat. So
yes,
community matters.
Mm-hmm. It is so important. And, as this audience is primarily Black women, we know that we will do all of the things. And sometimes you need somebody, that'll say, hey, pull your coattail a little bit, like, hey, sis, how can I help you? Or how can I support you? Or, like you say, go take a nap, go do whatever.
Exactly. It's like, do you need a break? Let me fill in here while you take a little break.
Right. Because that is so important that we do that. And it also helps us to, build some resilience when we are taking those breaks.
I always think that resilience is really about nurturing ourselves so that we can stay in the fight for whatever it is we're fighting for. Self-care is about building resilience to stay at the thing, because
Mhm.
nothing's going to change overnight. If these were easy changes that we were seeking, they would have happened already. So the
Mhm.
things we're trying to change are challenging, and that means we need to stay in the struggle for the change. And that means we need to be resilient. And that means we need to be taking care of ourselves.
Mhm.
And we also don't take care of ourselves just by ourselves. We need
Right.
community as part of that as well. So I think it's very important that we look at community and resilience and self-care as all of a piece, not these separate things that we do. You know, I love a pedicure as much as the next person, but
Mhm.
that is not actually self-care for me. That's
Right.
a nice little treat, but self-care is what keeps me able to keep doing the work, and that's a deeper thing than a pedicure or something like that, right?
Mhm.
So time alone, time in nature, a good conversation with a friend, something like that is
Right.
ultimately restorative in a way that some of the more fun but more superficial things, they can be, but they're probably not really feeding the need. And I just think it's important that we pay attention to what the real need is and
Right.
feed that real need, as well as getting the mani and pedi.
Right. Right. I heard someone say once that that's just grooming. Going to get your hair done. That's just grooming. I mean, I got my nails done. See,
I
but
I
yeah,
lo
that's grooming.
I like that. I am remembering that one because that is
Right.
exactly true.
But sitting and meditating, or taking your shoes off and grounding yourself in the grass, or getting on the phone and kikiing with a good friend, those things, that's a whole different
That's
energy.
the stuff that fills your soul.
That is definitely the stuff that fills your soul. Now, I'm skipping around the book a little bit. One of the things you mentioned several times is to practice radical realism, because
Yeah.
we know that there are some of these things that you know it's not going to happen overnight, as you've already said. So we have to have be real about what's really happening or what we're really up against. So talk to us a little bit about what you mean by the concept of radical realism.
Yeah, it really basically is just looking at whatever it is we're working towards and looking at the arc of the thing. So we know how many years slavery lasted in this country. We know how many years we are past slavery, and we can see how much work there is still to do. And that leads me to believe I will not live to see the end of that struggle. That's radical realism. And because I don't expect to live to see the end of the struggle, I'm not going to let that depress me. It's like, no, that's just the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that I don't have work to do. I
Right.
do have work to do. My job isn't to finish the work. My job is to continue the work.
Yes.
And so whatever the thing is, looking at it with as clear an eye as you possibly can. I mean, I like, so you're in Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
and Jimmy Carter is, God bless
Mm-hmm.
him. What an
Yes.
amazing, amazing human being he is. And I read this thing where he said that someone asked him what he wanted to live long enough to see in his life, and he said he wanted to live long enough to outlive the last guinea worm, because he and Rosalind were very active in fighting guinea worm disease, which is a horrible, horrible disease. When I read this last year at some point, there were six cases of guinea worm left in the world.
Wow.
And so he might outlive the
Mhm.
last case
Yeah.
of worm
Hold on.
disease. And that just brings such joy to my heart, because he set a radically realistic goal, because he could look at what was and say, okay, it's possible to do this. This
Mm.
is possible. If the circumstances had been otherwise, he would have probably said, I'd like to see it down 50% from where it was when we started. But,
Right.
he just looked at the reality of it and adjusted his expectations and his work accordingly. And I think there's a lot to be learned from that. Because I think often in this society, we want instant results.
Right.
Well, it would be nice, but it's not going to happen. So
Right.
why don't we let that go and instead keep doing the thing we can do and
Right.
making the change we can make and be inspired to keep doing that and to inspire other people to keep doing that rather than say, well, we worked at it for 5 years and it didn't happen, so we're going to give up. No, 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 no. Just keep going. You never know when the big shift is going to happen.
Right.
But if you quit, it is never going to happen. You can be sure of that.
That is so true. And I know I'm going to mess up the quote, but not Rosa Parks. Coretta Scott King has a quote, something to the effect of like, freedom is one, or we're working on it in every generation.
Yes. Yes.
I know I'm going to get it wrong, but that's basically the gist of it, is what she's saying, is that, yes, we're always going to be working towards freedom. We're always going to be working for things to be better for all people, in a multitude of different areas of life, because there just are so many, and it's important, that we continue to do the work. You also talk about legacy, and it's when I saw that, I'm like, that really meant a lot to me, because like you, I don't have children, and a lot of times people tie legacy to having a family or having children. But I have been saying for years, people that know me well, that I want my legacy to be, this work that I'm doing. And there's more, even some stuff that's coming real soon, everyone, that is a part of me, continuing to build on my legacy in that way. So, I like the fact that you brought that up in the book. So when you talk about legacy as being an activist, or, being activated to work against different things I have to back up real quick, because you also talk in the book about not so much about being against the thing, but not so much what are you against, but what are you for? So before you answer that other question, talk about that.
Okay, because they really tie together, So I think that especially right now in our society, people are so involved in what are they against. They're, and they get very angry and, really agitated about what they're against. And that's human nature. That's just how, literally biologically, how we're programmed, because the things we're against sort of trigger that same part of our brain that responds to fear. And so it's that very primitive part, and that feeling, you're mad about something, and you can feel you can feel the heat in your body, and you're just mad, right? But you can't sustain that for very long. It's going to go away, because our bodies, again, it's just a biological fact, are not meant to sustain that kind of emotion. Right. It would just wear us down and burn us out. Instead, if you flip that to what am I for? Even just saying those words, I can feel the difference in my body. When I talk about what I'm against, I can, even though I'm not even talking about any specific thing, I can feel that little bit of agitation showing up, right? When I talk about what I'm for, what I feel is, what do I love? What do I care about? And that will feed me forever. Right. And it also opens me to conversations with other people that are very different conversations than the what we're against conversation. Excuse me. And I'm not saying there's no place for that. Right. I'm saying I don't think we should live in that place. We can visit it, but then we should leave and go to the what are you for place, because that's the place of productivity. That's the place of possibility. That's the place of hope. So, and then to where that ties into legacy is, I really look at legacy as not just what do you have to give people or what people have you produced, but what do you as a human have to leave the world in the larger sense? How are people going to remember you? And we all want people to say we were nice people, or we were kind to our neighbors and things like that. But I want people to say that I inspired people to make the world a better place.
Right.
That's what that legacy would be amazing for me.
Right.
That's what
Mm.
I want as a legacy. So it's, what do you want in your soul? Not just stuff that you get to give away, but
Mm.
what of you do you leave behind? And I think that that's the thing, that when we look at that and we look at the things we care about and we look at being for something rather than against something, then you're
Mm.
talking about legacy. And
Right.
legacy is built every single day by every action that we take. And when we pay attention to that, we take much more intentional, thoughtful actions. We don't do the boneheaded things that we see people doing on social media.
Right.
So I think that it's a small shift, but I think it's a really important shift.
Yes, yes. And we do have a comment. I was watching Oprah years ago, and she was telling Maya Angelou that her legacy is her school in Africa. Maya looked at her and said, "Your legacy is the accumulation of every life you touch."
Yes. And we will never, ever, ever disagree with Maya Angelou.
No. But I mean, that means a lot. And there are so many different ways that we touch lives. Like, you give an example in the book of, giving somebody a couple of dollars, just being inspired to do that by someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that. That was when I was living in Savannah. I had read this story in the paper one day about this guy whose wife, whenever anyone would ask for money, and these were not wealthy people, she would give them a dollar or, whatever she could spare. Always she gave something. And I thought, well, the next time someone asks me for money, I'm going to do that. Now, Savannah, you're in your car all the time. It's not like you see people walking down the street. But this day I was at this really long stoplight, of which there are a few in Savannah. I mean, it's like you sit there and you grow old. And it was a really hot day. And there was this, probably an unhoused veteran, from his demeanor. That was what I thought. And he was by the side of the road with a sign. And I thought, okay, well, I said I was going to give the next person who asked money. So I rolled down my window and I grab a couple of bucks out of my wallet and I give it to him. And I see the guy in the truck in front of me noticing this exchange. And he hops out of his truck and he goes to the back and he gets out a couple of bottles of water and gives the veteran water and some money out of his pocket. And I remember thinking that the woman in the article gave me permission to be generous in that way. And then I gave the man in the truck permission to be generous in that way. And the man in the truck and the veteran and I all looked at each other. And there was just this moment where we all just got to appreciate each other's humanity. Right. And it was really beautiful. I mean, it has stuck with me all these years. It was such a profound moment. And those things matter,
They do. That matters. Signing a petition matters. Helping people get registered to vote matters. I mean, we'd be here all night if I talked about all the different things that matter. But it's those little things. And before we kind of shift into just some of your thoughts about what we can do presently, I just think that it's important that we look at the different ways that we can help people and support people and understand that it is a multitude of ways and that it is important. And it doesn't matter who you are or how much you have. It's something about caring for people. And I like how you talk about in the book, it can be like one small thing every day or once a month, whatever it is that suits your schedule.
Whatever you can sustain, and I think that people often, the mistake they often make is they decide to start too big and they say, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this every day. How about you just try doing it once a week, depending on what it is, right? Just Start smaller. You can always build up, but don't set yourself up to fail where then it's like, well, I didn't do it yesterday, so I'm just going to give up, right? And I think that we also, something I say in the book is, it'd be lovely if we could cure world hunger.
Right.
But doesn't it matter if you feed one person? It
Right.
certainly matters to the person you feed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think holding that context of this matters to that person, and it may matter in ways that you don't even ever see the result of, right? It could be that person then goes on to be able to find a job because they were nourished that day and had the energy to go out and look for work. You don't know what's going to come of what you do. And just do it, and do it with your heart, but do it so that it's sustainable, because I'd rather you fed someone once a week, every week for a year, than that you started by saying, I'm going to feed someone every day, and then didn't, and then 10 days later, you just were like, I can't do this. This is too much for me.
Right.
Don't do that to yourself. And don't set yourself up to disappoint yourself is the other thing. Set yourself up to succeed so that you can keep doing this. Set yourself up so that you're a good example to your kids of how to build a healthy habit like that, right? Or whoever's around you. Set yourself up to succeed.
Right. I agree with that so much, because, for example, I mentioned earlier that during the school year, I read to students, and when I through this program, it's called Power Lunch, and I go and basically spend 30 minutes with a student reading a book that they choose, and we get to know each other over the course of the year, and it's always a beautiful experience. But the first year I had one student, but this past year, I'm taking on two. So it's like, but I knew that I could sustain that I could show up once a week and read to two students. I knew it would work with my schedule and all of that. Had I done that the first year, I probably would have not been able to keep up with it. But, now I've built that muscle, so to speak.
You found your rhythm, right? So and as I said, you start small and then you can build up, because you're like, oh, you know what? I can do this. I know how to do this now. This is not going to stress me out. I'm not going to feel like this is more than I should have taken on, because I know what I'm getting into. Right. So building up over time definitely beats going all in and burning out.
Right.
Always.
Right.
Always. That's my really strong suggestion, is build up over time. Don't set yourself up for failure. And just so people know, I still have to remind myself of that, because I will say, oh, I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. And then I'm like, oh, wait.
I was supposed to do that. So that's
listen to yourself over here, girly.
Right.
So my latest thing is I'm writing postcards to voters in swing states.
Ooh.
And I was like, because I think this election is so very important.
Yes.
And so they send you a batch of postcards, and you have plenty of time. These don't get mailed till October 15th. So I have plenty of time to write them. There are 175 of them. And, but I was like, okay, well, I'm going to write one every day. And I was like, no, you're not. You're not. You might do 10 one day, but you're not going to write one every day. You're going to forget, and then you're going to feel bad. So don't do that.
Right. Yeah, with that much time, you can do them in batches or whatever.
Exactly. I know myself better than that. I am much better doing something in a batch than I am saying, oh, I'm going to do this every day. No.
Right.
So, but I do, it's like, and so for all of us, I think we have to remind ourselves, who are you? How do you function? What's realistic for you? Stay in your lane. Don't go, down the really dangerous ski slope when you have never been on skis in your life. Start small.
And I just really love that you say you're doing postcards, because maybe somebody doesn't want to go out and, carry a clipboard or whatever and register people in that way. Or maybe they don't want to get on the phone, because you do talk about a lot of the things that you support people who are considered introverts, some of the people you support. So writing a card, nobody knows who you are, and
nobody knows
like that. Nobody knows. So
nobody knows.
And I mean, it's just a matter of spending a little time. So I love that. So before we talk about some of the things we can do like right in the present moment, I just want to, the book is wonderful. I really suggest people get it, read it, absorb it, spend some time with it. There is a really great resource list at the back of the book that includes other books that you can read to learn more, as well as some digital resources, podcasts, and things like that. Before we segue into some tips for now, I would love to know a little bit about your podcast, Stepping into Truth.
So, my podcast is conversations with people, most of them, some of them you might have heard of, but most of them are people you've never heard of. And they are people who have either written a book or just in their normal lives, they are out there doing their activist work. And I really like to highlight people who are doing work in realms outside of the sort of typical ones. And I think it's important that people understand how many ways of being an activist there are, that it doesn't look any one way. So I've interviewed people who are doing work in reproductive justice rights. My last interview was with a man who is a pastor in North Carolina, and he's written a book that is about how divisive our conversation is and how we can keep hope alive in an era when everyone is just spewing hate all over the place, right? So I interviewed someone who wrote a whole book on civility and why civility is a problem and how civility can be manipulated to keep people in their place. One of my favorite conversations was with a woman who's written a book about how bonobo apes, our closest relative in the ape family, how in bonobo society, there is no sexual violence. Because if a male bonobo starts to aggress on a female, the female lets out a specific cry, and all the other females, whether they know her or not, come running and they chase off the aggressor.
Wow.
I mean, I was like, sign me up.
Wow. Woo. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, so I've interviewed these incredible people who are studying these things and working in these arenas that I would never have known anything about. And it just gives me so much inspiration, because one of the things I always say is, no matter what you're interested in, follow your interest, because with 8 billion people on the planet, there are other people who are interested in the same thing. Right. And we need people to do something. So if everyone's doing something, everything will get taken care of. And I really believe that. So yeah, the podcast is an opportunity for me to explore with people what they're doing and have an opportunity for them to inspire other people. And it's a real joy to do it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's scrolling at the bottom as well. If you go to steppingintotruth.com, you can tap into that. So, and in our last few minutes, we know that there is so much going on in the world right now that has a lot of people kind of at a loss for words, a loss for ideas, just not really knowing what to do. And of course, we see a lot of things on social media where people are posting about the various conflicts that are happening around the world, as well as things that are happening here in the US. And I personally have seen a lot of things where maybe people might be being a little bit bullied, so to speak, from not being vocal or being with their thoughts and feelings about, the genocide and other things that are happening. And it doesn't mean that those people don't have a thought or a feeling. They may choose not to.
Right.
On social media, having those conversations. So first part of the question, and I'll let you answer that. What type of things do you feel that we can do based upon your knowledge to kind of support these causes? Because we're for life. We're for children living and being able to grow to adults. We're for these things. right? But
Yes.
what can we do in terms of the current conflicts to kind of have our voices out there and be activists in our own way?
Okay, so let me start with, I'm going to start actually with what I think we should not do. I think we should not assume that because someone hasn't spoken out on social media that they haven't spoken out. People have lives, thank God, off of social media platforms. So unless you know someone personally and are with them 24/7, I don't think any of us should make assumptions about what other people are or are not saying or doing about any of the conflicts, any of the issues that are currently overwhelming us.
Right.
I also think that it's the same way anger is a really easy emotion to fall into, so is shaming. And I don't think it's helpful. I think, we're not in middle school anymore. Let's not be those people. And we never know what circumstances someone else is dealing with. We don't know someone else's whole story. So there may be a really good reason why someone is not speaking out in public that we don't know a thing about, and we should not be judging. And even if they're not speaking out simply because they don't feel like they know enough, that's legitimate too. If you don't feel like you know enough to talk on something, you're probably better off keeping your mouth shut.
Right.
And learning what you can learn. I think it would be more productive for us with the conflicts that are going on, specifically the situation in Gaza, the situation in Congo, the situation in Sudan. Those three situations are all genocides at this point. I think it would be more productive for us to look at how we can help and putting our efforts there and saying, okay, how can we help? What is needed? Is it money, if we have money to donate to organizations that are doing work on the ground? Is it letter writing to our elected representatives? What can we do to help? Is it a letter to the editor of our paper? Is it a conversation with friends to try and inspire them to move off of the sidelines if they're sitting on the sidelines? Is it a conversation where we get to hear why someone may have a different opinion than we do without it devolving into a shouting match or well, then that's it, we're done, I'm never talking to you again. We don't solve our problems that way. That's how we get to the position that we're in right now, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important that we stop demonizing one another and we stop deciding that we know what someone is thinking. And also, frankly, if these situations were easy to resolve, they'd have been fixed.
Right.
These are complicated situations. There are things that are clear and very true that should not be happening. But that's not the same thing as how do you fix it? Right? There are baselines. I think we should have a ceasefire. I think that should be a bare minimum, but that's not going to solve the long-term problem. It's what we need to do right now.
Right.
But that's just the beginning. And then what's the next step? So I think also just looking at what's needed right now, but also thinking about, well, what's the next step after that? Because sometimes we will just say, okay, well, this is what we need. And then we turn our attention away.
Mm-hmm.
We have to stay with it. The civil rights movement did not succeed overnight to the extent that it succeeded.
Right.
Backsliding here, but it took a long time. It took 13 months for the Montgomery bus boycott to work, just for that one thing to work. 13 months. So we cannot expect that we're going to change everything overnight, and we can't turn our attention away. And the people who worked towards the Montgomery bus boycott and then succeeded at that, they didn't stop there. They didn't say, well, we got that. Okay, cool. They were like, okay, we did this. Now what's next?
Right.
And they were thinking about what was next as they were working on the boycott. So that, I think we need a broader perspective, and I think we need a more human perspective and a more charitable perspective. We would not want to be demonized by other people. We should not be demonizing people simply because they haven't spoken out in a way that we think is okay.
Right. Right. That's true. That's true, because everyone has their own path. And like you said, we don't know what might be going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of.
No.
So that is good. That is good. Sound counsel, so to speak. But even for those of us who, whether we're going to be activated to do something or not, we've already talked about self-care. From a self-care perspective, how can we really, take care of ourselves in the midst of, because that's one thing, or, that's one set of issues, but then we're dealing with a crazy election and, rights being rolled back. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff going on at the same time. And yes, we can focus on more than one thing at a time, or be mindful of more than one thing at a time, but we still have to take care of ourselves in the midst of all of that.
And, I honestly sometimes, and I mean this quite sincerely, I feel like sometimes they throw all these things at us so that we can't focus, so that we are distracted and we're trying to just, whack-a-mole with the problems, which is why I say really try and narrow your activist intentions down to one or two things. It doesn't mean you don't care about the other things, it just means you can't put your energy into a billion things at once. And in terms of self-care, I mean, that's part of it, is narrowing your focus so you're not spreading yourself too thin. But sometimes, I mean, I take breaks from the news. I'll take a couple of days and I'll be like, if I really need to know, someone will tell me.
Right.
But right now, what I need to do is sit on my sofa and read a book that has no redeeming social value.
Right.
That's just what is. And that's what works for me. What works for someone else is going to be different, but we all have something that works for us. And we need to be doing that, because we cannot just day in, day out do this work without frying ourselves to a crisp. We have to take a break. We have to reset. We have to even just have breathing space to think and see if the decisions we're making are good ones.
Right.
They may have been good when we started, and we may have a different perspective now, but we haven't given ourselves 5 minutes to recognize it. So I believe in listening internally and knowing when it's time to say, I need to take a step back for a little bit. A little bit doesn't mean the next 5 years.
Right.
It's like a little bit, and we all know what a little means. So, and then we get back into the work. And I think that that's the best way to approach it and that again is about radical realism. What can I really do?
Right.
And without sacrificing myself.
Right.
Because we need you. So we don't want you to sacrifice yourself.
Right. Right. And when you say that, I think of someone like a Fannie Lou Hamer who left here prematurely.
Yes.
She sacrificed herself. There are many others who, so entrenched in the work and sacrificed themselves along the way. So,
yes.
We have the opportunity to do things differently, and we should take advantage of that.
Yeah, we really should.
We have another comment. I can't wait to read the book. Yes, please do. And share with my women's political activist group. This last topic, so important. Absolutely. We all have to find the path that's comfortable for us and not fall into the anger pit. Yes.
Thank you. Yes, that is so true.
Yes. Yes. So I know that you have a lot of things going on, award-winning authoress that you are. So are there any particular spaces or places where people can look for you online, or, where you'll be out in the world? I know you mentioned you'll be in Atlanta. You mentioned to me offline that you'll be in Atlanta this summer. Any places where people can look to connect with you and maybe, get a book signed or anything like that?
Well, right now, all of the events I'm doing are private events. So I don't have, unfortunately, any public events on the schedule yet at the moment. But I'm probably going to do my online course, my online workshop
Okay.
of micro activism in the fall through an organization that I regularly teach for. So that will be on my website. There'll be
Perfect.
information about that. And I keep it updated with what's happening. And when there are public events or opportunities, I definitely let people know. I have to say, Atlanta in August is not my idea of a good time, but I'm really looking forward to coming to this conference that is for Black authors because I mean, what a wonderful event. And Marcie, you were telling me you've been there
Yeah.
before, so
Yes.
I'm
Last
really
year.
looking forward to it. But
Yes. And I'm
it's sold
hoping
out. It's
yeah, it
sold out.
is. It is. It's sold out. So I'm hoping somebody backs out and I can like slide in there since I didn't register early enough. But yeah, I might have to talk to somebody who I can talk to see if I because it really was a good conference. It's the national NBCC
National
National
Book Club
Book.
Conference.
Yes, I just want to make sure I said that correct. But yes, right now it's full in first weekend in August. But you'll be on the lookout because you never know. Sometimes things happen and people
Things
can't
happen.
and spaces open up. But yes, that's a wonderful thing. But for those who haven't had haven't had an opportunity to pick up a copy of the book, it is available at the Brown Girl Collective Bookstore, which is just that Brown Girl Collective Bookstore.com, which is affiliated with Bookshop. So if you like to get books through Bookshop, please feel free to pick up a copy of it there. And of course, wherever your favorite retailers and booksellers are, because it is definitely an important book and it really applies to anyone who wants to do good in the world. As I think I posted on Threads, like if you want to do your reasonable service. Which,
Oh, I love that. Reasonable service.
I
Yes.
got it from church, girl.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm doing my reasonable service. But yes, this is a good book to help you kind of navigate your way towards doing that. So, Omkari, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We've had several people in the room tonight. Many are just sitting and meditating on it all because I see you here, but you're not saying anything. But that's all well and good. We know that you're absorbing the information, and I really pray that you will not only get a copy of the book, but also share it with others because there are tips in here for like how to work in community and groups and set that stuff up and all of that. And there are profiles of several different activists in the book. So it's rich, it's mighty, it's small, but it's mighty, put it that way. So thank you so much, Omkari. I'm going to let you grab some water, but please don't hang up just yet. I'm just going to make an announcement about next week's book, but I want to give you an opportunity to get some water and all that. And thank you again for your time for this wonderful book.
Thank you so much. This was really a pleasure.
Yes. Thank you. All right, everybody. So thank you so much for being here and being a part of this conversation. I definitely suggest that you grab a copy of the book and, share it, have conversations, and really go through the exercises and things like that to figure out, what it is you want to do, what your archetype is for how you want to do things, and then be about the business of helping to make this world a better place. So by means of announcement, our next book next week, actually it's about work. And it's actually another colorful book. So that's pretty interesting. It wasn't planned that way, but it's just working out that way. We will have my English cousin, no, not really. My British cousin, Tamu Thomas, will be here next week to talk about her book, Women Who Work Too Much. Break free from toxic productivity and find your joy. So there's some little through line there. Do the thing, but don't overdo the thing. So I look forward to having that conversation with you all next week with Tamu. And until then, you all have a great rest of the week and continue to live well. Take good care. Bye-bye.